Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my recording of my chapters. I had chapter 9 and 10 this week, so I'm now doing chapter 10, which is selecting appropriate strategies and tactics. And this is again for our macro social work class and from our lovely social work macro practice book. So let's begin on chapter 10. So the intro of chapter 10. So social workers should be open to the possibility that practices in many of the arenas in which they operate will be well entrenched and will be a tendency to resist change. So some areas can be like, we don't want to change. Like we're resisting it. We're definitely like, we don't want to change. We're going to keep things the way they are. So the goals of this chapter are to assess the political and economic context of an episode of planned change, identify and define 5 approaches to change, and select strategies and tactics to use in an episode of planned change. So, assessing political and economic feasibility. So, it gave the definition of politics, and I apologize, I'm trying to breathe through my mouth again and talk. Politics, as used here, refers to the reasons or motivation behind the different ways individuals respond when asked to support a change effort. Preparing a list of participants in each system and assessing the political and economic strengths and liabilities of each participant, which is extremely important as we always talk about strengths in social work, can assist the change agent and action system in making the best use of a participant's skills. So skills are very important as well. We use it every day in our lives, especially when it comes to going for job interviews and figuring out what our skills are in life, like what we're good at. So that leads us to the question of how long has the problem existed? Is the problem considered an emergency? And if the problem is episodic or recurring, how often does it recur? So these are really important questions when it comes to, like we talked about in the last chapter, like figuring out a problem. So has the problem been lasting a long time? Is it not getting any better? Is it an emergency? Like, does it have to take action right now? And if the problem is episodic or recurring, how often does it occur? So like, does it come back? Does it last a long time? So these are important questions. So some terms that were talked about in the book that I wanted to go over briefly, like just definitions. So duration is the length of time the condition or problem has existed. So duration can be, so like how long has this been going on for? Has it been going on for years, months, or days, weeks? Intensity is the extent to which it is considered threatening to individual, organizational, or community survival. So, like, how bad is it affecting somebody? Or how bad is it affecting the environment? Like, do we need to take action right away? Frequency refers to the number of times the condition is likely to occur within a given time frame. So, like how often does it happen? So, like, how many times will this occur over time? And long-standing problems are hard to change, which is definitely true because if it's been going on for a long time, it's definitely going to be hard to change it, and there needs to be some serious action taking place. So the next part is about assessing resources. So definitely when it comes to figuring out the problem, cost is often decision makers' primary concern when considering a proposed change. I know money is definitely a problem even nowadays when it comes to assessing problems and figuring out problems in the world. The change agent must understand how such decisions are made and must be prepared to address the cost issues advocating for change. The change agent must also attempt to calculate costs associated with change. So it's very important to, kind of keep track of, how much it's going to cost to fix this problem. And costs can vary. So multiple questions came up here for this chapter. So what anticipated costs related to the proposed change can be itemized and what must be estimated? What sources of financial support or in-kind donations should be approached? What will this problem cost the organization or community if nothing is done? And how can this cost be framed so that it will be persuasive to decision makers as a good investment to support the proposed change? So these are all really important, especially when it comes to figuring out what our resources are and exactly how much it's going to cost us. So I talked about a simple line budget. So what is needed to mount a program. So for example, this was like just an example from the book, about after school program. So it said like the arts and craft instructor, for example, will cost $1,800 per semester in dollars. A music teacher will cost $1,200 per semester. This is all in dollars. Sports and game supervision will cost $3,000. Operating expenses such as rent, printing, equipment, and supplies. Insurance will be like $1,000, $250, $500, and $500 per semester, with a total of $8,250. So there are long-term costs. So it never is cheap to have, all these things in one place. And I think it's really important to estimate the cost, because we need to figure out, like, how much is this going to cost us? And we can't just say, like, okay, we're going to get all these people together, but we really need to think about, how much is going into it and the money that's going into it. So selecting approaches to change. So as the change agent completes the process of thinking through what it might cost, the nature of the problem and the significant supporting information should be coming into focus. What this means is this makes clear what needs to be changed exactly. So it talked about concept mapping, which is the process of brainstorming together, developing a problem statement, sorting through different perspectives on how to reframe the statement, and using whatever data and information are available, which is really important. So task 2 is select a change approach. So what approach is most likely to achieve the desired change? So change efforts are intended to do the following: promote improved quality of life for clients in the communities served, and 2, promoting improved quality of work life for employees as a means of helping them provide the best possible services to clients in our communities. So this basically means we have to propose 5 approaches to change, like I mentioned before. So the goal of this chapter was to address these 5 approaches to change. So the first approach to change that we're going to talk about is policy approach, which is represented by a formally adopted statement about what is to be done and how it will happen. So technically a course of action. So what course of action are we going to take for this change? So these policies may be established by elected representatives, boards, administrators, or a vote of the people affected. So this is initially saying how it's going to happen and what policies we're going to make for this change. So the program approach is next. So how much like programs, but may be smaller in scale, have a time-limited existence, and be more flexible. They can also be adapted to the needs of a changing environment. Projects, if successful, can turn into programs. This is all about initiating a short-term project to demonstrate a new or untested intervention. So, a short-term project can then become an intervention here, so which can help us figure out, how we're going to fix the issue that's occurring. So project approach is next. So much like programs, but have a time-limited existence and are more flexible so that they can be adapted to the needs of a changing environment, which is pretty self-explanatory. And then the personnel approach, personnel meaning people. So that's in people interacting with one another. So interactions that go well enhances productivity in the community, which makes sense. Change agents should be able to identify problems and undertake change in this level, which is where people and organizations come together. So this is initially a really, really important approach, as this is where people start to interact with one another and we start to see the change happen, which is important because everybody in the community needs to make a decision. So practice approach is next. So this refers to how an organization or individuals within it carry out the basic functions in ways that are less formal than written policies. This isn't so much of a policy, but it is simply the way they choose to help new residents learn the ropes. So that is our 5 approaches to change that were listed in the book. I believe it's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep. So all are very important, though, when it comes to talking about change. You have people talking to one another and agreeing with one another. You have the project, like what project we're going to do to help change. Figuring out what programs work, and also developing that policy, which we see all the time in social work. So next is selecting strategies and tactics. So I'm just going to give the definition of strategy, which is overall efforts designed to ensure that the proposed change is accepted. So that's strategy. And then tactics refers to techniques and behaviors, that are employed in relation to the target system and designed to maximize the probability that the strategy will be successful and the proposed change adopted. So, when we consider strategies, with which strategy will the change effort begin? So, will it be necessary to consider sequential strategies if a single strategy isn't working? If there are multiple sequential targets, which strategies will be used with each target. So then it talks about collaboration. Oops, use my voice. Collaboration, campaign, and contest. So these are just some definitions here that I wrote from the book. It was like the 3 C's. So collaboration implies a working relationship where the two systems agree that change must occur. A campaign is used when the target must be convinced of the importance of the change, but when communication is still possible between the two systems. And then finally, contest is used when, because of the strength of the opposition, neither of the two strategies is possible. So basically, one is saying to agree, one is saying it's still possible between the two, and then the last one is saying neither of the two is possible. So then identified certain tactics. So what tactic is needed first when it comes to this change? So as the change progresses, is it anticipated that changing strategies may lead to the use of different tactics? Yes. Tactics are active steps taken on a daily basis that become the building blocks of a strategy and move participants towards the change goals effort. So coming up with these different tactics is really important because we need to figure out a strategy and figure out, what's working, what's not working, and how it's affecting our goal. So then implementation, just the definition. So these tactics are used when the action and target systems are willing to work together. When these systems agree that change is needed and allocation of resources is supported by critical decision makers, the change can move toward implementation. So this was just one of the definitions from the book. And then it talked a lot about campaign strategies. What are the pros and cons of campaign strategies? And then it raised some questions here. So who needs to be convinced that the proposed change is needed? So who in the community and who needs to be convinced that, okay, this change needs to happen? What persuasive techniques are most likely to be effective? So the techniques that we're thinking about when it comes to change. Campaign strategies are used when members of the target system do not necessarily agree that the change is needed, but may be willing to listen to arguments on its behalf. They require an understanding of the target and a calculation of what tactics are most likely to succeed, which is really important. And specific tactics are also used as described in the next slide, which is all the different types of campaign strategies. So we'll start with education. So education tactics. So these tactics involve various forms of communication from members. I think I made a typo there, but that's okay. On the action system directed toward those in the target system. So this can be certain things such as face-to-face meetings, formal presentations, or written materials. And the major goals of the education tactics are to present perception, attitudes, opinions, quantitative data, or other info to propose change. But when education fails, however, to produce the desired result or fails short of having the desired impact, the change agent turns to persuasion. So then we'll talk about persuasion, which refers to the art of convincing others to accept and support one's point of view of an issue. So then it said briefly that social workers must frequently use persuasive tactics in addition to collaborative tactics, because their belief that the change is worth pursuing is not always shared by decision makers. Which then leaves us to, not sure how to say this word. I think it's cooptation. We're going to go with that. So cooptation is closely related to persuasion and is defined as minimizing anticipated opposition by absorbing or including members of the target system or in the action system. So once target system members are part of the planned change effort, it is likely that they will assume some ownership of the change process and they may be able to recruit others from the target system into the action system. So there's a lot of big words here, but these are all good examples of these campaign strategies and all these different tactics that can be used when it comes to making these changes. And then the final one was lobbying. So lobbying is a form of persuasion that targets decision makers who are neutral or opposed to a proposed change. And then I just briefly looked up the definition online, and lobbying was defined as the act of trying to influence a politician or public official on an issue. So full-time lobbyists are paid to represent a special interest. Typically, they target elected officials to get their support and their votes. And nonprofit organizations sometimes pool resources to hire lobbyists to support or oppose legislation affecting the human services industry. So again, these are just essentially, it's just the act of influencing a important figure when it comes to fixing these issues, so that they can help to help resolve the problem. So next was pros and cons of contest strategies. So it said in the book, it is opposition to the proposed change so strong that it can only be successful by imposing the change on an unwilling target system. So can the proposed change be effective if it is forced? What are potential consequences of conflict? And then it said what contest strategies are and what they're all about. So a contest strategy is used in situations where target system representatives cannot be persuaded by the action system, target system representatives refuse to communicate with the action system, and also members of the target system pose as being in favor of change but do nothing to further it or secretly work against it. So those can be possible consequences when it comes to dealing with a problem and figuring out how to resolve it. So next is bargaining and negotiation. So our book did a definition of this. So bargaining and negotiation refer to situations in which the action and target systems confront one another with the reasons for their support and or opposition to a proposal or an issue if it is handled well. Bargaining and negotiation can lead to win-win solutions where both target and action system are pleased with and fully support the outcome. But sometimes result can be a win-lose, where one system is clearly the victor, or it can also be a lose-lose, which means both sides lose, where both systems give something up, are disappointed in the results, and are possibly worse off than before the change. So it can go either way, like it said, a lose-lose. So basically, like, you can come up with a solution and be like, oh my goodness, like, this is not how we wanted these results to be, and we were better off beforehand. So then large group or community action was next definition in the book. So large group or community action refers to the preparing, training, and organizing of substantial members of people who are willing to form a pressure group and advocate for change through various forms of collection, such as picketing, disruption of meetings, sit-ins, boycotting, and other confrontational tactics, which we all know about, picketing, like picket signs, people boycotting places. Peaceful demonstrations are legal activities often used by groups on either side of an issue to express their views. The pro-life and pro-choice movements are examples of groups that regularly use this tactic. So very familiar words, though, like such as the boycotting, the picketing, sit-ins, disruption of meetings, all very important when it comes to the community coming together and taking action and people disagreeing with certain things. So then it talked about civil disobedience. So this is basically just activities. These are all just definitions from the book that I'm going over. So this was about activities intentionally break the law. So example from the book was about Rosa Parks when she deliberately defied a local ordinance when she refused to move to the back of the bus in Montgomery, Alabama. So she basically said, like, I'm not going to follow these rules. I'm going to do what I want to do. And she broke the law. So our environmental advocates have blocked access to construction sites when forests or endangered species were jeopardized. So these are just all examples of civil disobedience. And anti-abortion activists have harassed physicians and patients at abortion clinics. So these are just people going against the law and basically standing up for themselves, like Rosa Parks did, for this definition of civil disobedience. So purposes next. So change goals often evolve as the change process moves along. Therefore, a re-examination prior to selection of tactics is in order. So an example of this I put with the problem of domestic violence, the condition may have been brought to public awareness by the perceived need for additional emergency shelter space for battered women. However, as the problem is analyzed and better understood, the purpose may shift towards consciousness raising for all women in the community who are at risk for violence. So that's really important, though, especially for women, because domestic violence is definitely very serious, and it is a problem that needs to be taken care of right away. So next is controlling and host systems. So the controlling and host systems can be perceived in a variety of ways. If they are active supporters or sponsors of change, excuse me, it may be possible to move quickly to implementation tactics as part of a collaboration strategy to bring about that change. So then they talked about the primary client. So this role can vary, and the way in which the role is perceived can affect selection of change tactics. Sometimes it may be difficult to determine who the primary client really is, which is definitely true because, especially in these situations, resources, key considerations in choosing tactics are the nature and quantity of resources available to the action system, because some tactics require more or different types of resources than others. And then this part was very important because I know in social work we always talk about ethics. So there was a brief section at the end of the chapter about professional ethics. So ethical dilemma is defined as a situation in which a choice has to be made between equally important but seemingly conflicting values. And I see you believe in social work all the time. We always run into these professional ethics or ethical dilemma issues. You know, like what's going to be best for my client. You know, what decisions we should make with them. Like, is this ethically okay? Like, can I do this? And macro level change principle, it said it was a clash between the principle of dignity and worth of the person. So the autonomy, which is what we talked about in our other class with individuals, talking about that autonomy part, and the principle of service, beneficence, can occur when members of the client system are determined to resist risking what little they have, which is that autonomy again. So that brings us to the end of chapter 10. I'm almost going on 20 minutes here. I think I'm at 20 minutes in. So the summary of this chapter is basically saying, I'll zoom in. It is necessary to examine how various parties view the urgency of the proposed change. So parties, meaning all these different types of people, they have to understand and examine, you know, how we're going to go about this change and how urgent is it going to be. And addressing these changes involves that duration, how long, intensity, how serious is it, and the frequency. So how much is it occurring in the community? Collaboration, campaign, and contest strategies were introduced, along with a number of tactics designed to carry them out. So we did talk briefly about that collaboration and campaign strategies and how important those are when it comes to addressing the problem. The relationship between the action and target systems is often used to gauge which strategy and its accompanying tactics should be used. Some changes will always be needed in the field of human services, which is obviously true because we're always changing in our field. And we believe that as social workers are well positioned or to lead or coordinate the planning stages of such change efforts and to bring them to the point of action and implementation. So we definitely play a huge role when it comes to proposed change and coming up with these strategies and coming up with ways to make a change in our community. And that's what we're always doing as social workers. We're always coming up with different ways to help our clients and help change in the community. So that is the end of chapter 10. So, and this chapter again was called, I have my book with me. This chapter was called, let me turn the page. Selecting appropriate strategies and tactics, and it's from our macro social work book. And this was just a brief summary of everything that it basically went over. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope that everyone receives this video okay, and hopefully it makes sense. Thanks.